Here's something I learned way too late in life. That version of you that shows up at the board meeting, the one who nails the presentation, stays composed through the crisis, pivots from one emotional register to another without breaking a sweat. That person isn't you. They're useful, good at their job, keeping you employed and respected, maybe married or partnered, but that's not you. And at some point, around 50, the mask starts to slip, not because you got lazy, because you got tired, bone tired, tired of performing a version of yourself that you assembled from other people's expectations. Today, I'm talking to a man who spent decades as a congregational rabbi. Funerals in the morning, preschool sing-alongs after lunch, budget meetings in the evening. A man who learned early on to smooth the edges of his emotions, to fit inside a box that wasn't built for him. Until one day, the job ended, and he looked in the mirror and had no idea who was staring back. His name is Ted Riter, and his story is going to feel maybe uncomfortably familiar if you're looking at Your Third Third. I'm Steve Gershik, and this is Your Third Third. Welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time to the show. This show is for those of us who've spent decades building identities around titles and outputs, only to realize that somewhere along the way, we lost the plot. Today, we're going deep into masking, the persona we construct to meet the world's expectations, and what happens when that mask no longer fits us. We're going to talk about identity crisis without the crisis, about a simple formula that can diagnose exactly where you're stuck, and about the terrifying freedom that comes when you stop performing. Ted Riter was a congregational rabbi for decades. Now he coaches. He coaches individuals and couples on embodiment, intimacy, and showing up as your actual self instead of your highlight reel. I sat down with him recently, and the conversation hit me in places I wasn't expecting. Let's start at the beginning with the training ground. Ted grew up in a small town in Texas, College Station, centered around Texas A&M, and like a lot of us, he learned very early that his emotions were negotiable, that there was a correct amount of feeling, and he was exceeding his allowance.
And grew up in a home where things were very restricted as far as emotions. We were allowed to have this expanse of emotions, but not past. So there was a certain level, a certain barometer, which was too much or too little. So it was too boisterous, but it could also be too sad. So not happy enough. And so it was really a childhood of being told to shave off the edges of those emotions, or to keep those emotions within a box. And with that, an ongoing narrative that your emotions are not the right emotions. You're not feeling the right things. And wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to lay on to a child. That the feelings that you're feeling, so the sadness, the happiness, the exuberance, the grief, whatever it is, didn't fit in the way that it was supposed to fit.
Shave off the edges. Keep it in the box. How many of us got that memo? Maybe not spoken out loud, but communicated in 1,000 small corrections. Too loud. Calm down. Why are you so sensitive? Big boys don't cry. And here's the thing. We didn't just learn to hide our emotions. We learned not to trust them.
And so it took me many years to unpack this. But what I recognized is I grew up not trusting my own emotions and not feeling they were really safe to come out, and therefore not feeling safe to show my full self. And so instead, wearing the mask that was appropriate for that moment.
The mask that was appropriate for that moment. Now, for most of us, this stays personal. We learn to read the room. We code switch at work. We're one version with our parents, another with our friends, another on a first date. But Ted took his childhood training and turned it professional. He became a rabbi. And suddenly, the skill that helped him survive childhood became the skill that made him excellent at his job.
I could go from a funeral, like the days were packed. I could have a funeral in the morning, and I could be sitting on the floor with the preschool students later on playing guitar and singing songs. And then I could, meet some, I have a board meeting around the budget in the evening, right? So it could go through all of these things in one day, but because I had learned how to control those emotions to meet someone else's needs, it worked until it didn't.
It worked until it didn't. That phrase stuck with me. I want to pause here because I think a lot of us are nodding along, thinking, yeah, that's just professionalism. That's just being good at your job. And sure, to a degree. Context switching is a skill. Emotional regulation is a skill. Reading the room and showing up appropriately is a skill. But there's a cost, and the cost compounds over decades.
What I recognize now, looking back at all this, is that I couldn't show up fully. And when I couldn't show up fully, I felt unseen, unappreciated, unloved, and lonely.
Unloved, lonely. From the outside, Ted was successful, respected, a pillar of his community, and from the inside, he was disappearing. This is the paradox of our professional masks. The better it works, the more invisible we become. We're getting praised for a performance that has almost nothing to do with who we actually are, and every standing ovation just reinforces the distance between us on stage and the person who goes home alone. In an earlier episode of this podcast, we talked about the friendship desert that hits men especially hard after 50, but everyone, the loss of work-based containers, the evaporation of social circles. But here's the deeper cut. Even when you have people around you, even when you're literally standing at the center of a community, you can be profoundly alone if no one actually knows you, because they don't know you. They know the mask. In 2013, Ted left the rabbinate, and I asked him, what did you find waiting for you when the title was gone?
So the big abrupt ending to my full-time rabbinate was in 2013, and it was messy. And what I found was an abyss, a darkness of not knowing what to do in the world, being scared, not knowing really how to put the next step forward, and then climbing kind of out of that hole and trying out being a rabbi again for a few years, doing some interim work, which was actually so healing for me. Just absolutely loved it. So that I could actually step out again.
An abyss. Not a transition plan, not a sabbatical, not a finding myself adventure that makes for a great TED Talk. An abyss. I think about this when I talk to people approaching retirement or whose kids just launched or who got laid off after 25 years. We all have these narratives about reinvention and new chapters, and those narratives are true eventually. But they often skip the abyss part. The abyss is real, and it's supposed to be terrifying because because you just lost the scaffolding that held up your identity, the title that answered the question, what do you do? The role that organized your days, the mask that told you who to be in any given moment. Without that scaffolding, you're left with a question most of us haven't asked since we were a lot younger. Who am I, actually? Here's something I found fascinating. Ted told me about a woman in his synagogue about 20 years ago who pushed back on his constant encouragement to grow and evolve.
And a woman in our annual meeting was complaining that I was always encouraging them to grow and to evolve and to see things new. And she said, my portrait is painted. And I thought that was the saddest thing.
How many of us have made that same declaration? Maybe not out loud, but in the way we approach our days. The way we stop trying new things because we're afraid of being bad at them, because we all hold some kind of fear of the unknown. The way we settle into routines that feel less like rituals and more like ruts. We tell ourselves our paint is dry, that we are who we are, that fundamental change isn't available to us anymore. Ted didn't believe it then, and he doesn't believe it now.
Because when I turned 50, I recognized that there was part of me that felt the exact same as when I was 40 and 30 and 20 and 10 and an infant probably. There's part of me that never changes. It's part of you that never changes. We learn a lot of stuff. We gain skills. We carry a lot of baggage sometimes. But there's part of us that never, ever changes. There's an essence that we have. And that's true. And so it's trying to discover what's my true essence. What is me without the titles, without the pains, without the capital T or lowercase t traumas, right? What's the real essence of me?
An essence. The paint isn't dry. It never was. The portrait isn't painted. We just stopped picking up the brush. All right, I promised you a formula because I'm a logic person, an intellect person, and frameworks help make me make sense of things that feel overwhelming. Ted introduced me to something called the Beckhart-Harris change formula. He didn't invent it. It's been around since the 60s, originally designed for organizational change. But Ted's innovation was applying it to the personal realm, to the question of why we stay stuck, even when we know we're miserable. Here's how it works.
Picture this in your head, a little algebra equation. D, which is dissatisfaction, multiplied by V, vision, multiplied by F, which is first steps. All of that has to be greater than resistance in R. So DVF has to be greater than R.
D times V times F has to be greater than R. Dissatisfaction times vision times first steps has to exceed our resistance. Now here's the key insight, and this is where the math gets interesting because these are multiplied together. If any one of them is zero, the whole product is zero. Remember 7th grade math or 4th grade math? Your dissatisfaction could be off the charts. You could have the clearest first steps imaginable. But if you have no vision, no picture of what life looks like on the other side, well, 0 times anything is 0. Resistance wins. Ted walked me through it using my own example. I told him about my meditation retreat, about my struggle to let go of thoughts that consume my attention.
So how dissatisfied are you? 1 to 10.
An 8 or a 9.
Great. 8 or 9. The vision. Can you imagine what it would be to be able to let go of thought during meditation for 10 minutes or 20 minutes? Imagine what that would be.
Not for myself, but for others.
For others.
I rely on the attainments of people close to me to inspire me try to imagine that for myself, but can
So
I?
you've heard these things.
Yes.
It's possible, right? So it's a positive number somewhere, right?
Yes.
Can you imagine what the first steps would be to start doing that? What would you need to start doing so you could get to a place where you can meditate without lots of thoughts coming through? Well, can you think of a first step?
The first big unlock for me was that it was okay to just notice it without changing it.
So the first steps would just simply be noticing. So here's how the formula works. You're about 8 or 9 dissatisfied. You're a positive number, whatever it is, 2 or 3 for vision, and you've got at least one first step. So all of those, if you multiply them together, let's say like a 9 times a 4, which is 36, times 2, which is 72. So if you're looking at your resistance, is that more than your resistance? Or is your resistance so hard that, no, my resistance is 100. Like it's never going to pass. That's where you get stuck. But if you go back to it and you figure out like, oh, here's my dissatisfaction, here's the vision, but I've got no idea what the first steps would be. A number times 0 is going to be 0. There's always going to be less than your resistance.
This is diagnostic. If you're feeling stuck, you can audit yourself. Are you not dissatisfied enough with your current situation? Maybe you need to do an honest accounting of what the status quo is actually costing you. Do you have no vision? Maybe you need to sit with Ted's question, which I'll get to in a minute, the fail-safe question. Are you missing first steps? Maybe you're overwhelmed by complexity and need to break it down into something small, something you can do this week, something that creates a visible win. Or is your resistance just so high that the math can't work? And if so, what's driving that resistance? What safety is the mask providing? What are you terrified of losing? I asked Ted what it takes for someone who spent their entire adult life being rewarded for outputs to learn how to just be.
When you're talking about like, what am I creating in this world? For me, it all comes down to how much love am I giving and how much love am I letting in? I'm allowing myself to receive. After doing hundreds and hundreds of funerals, it was always interesting to see what someone had done, but it was more powerful and so much more meaningful to hear about the person they were, how they connected with others. And that's not a doing. That's a relaxing into being.
At the funeral, nobody leads with your quarterly numbers. They lead with how you made people feel, how you connected, who you were in the personal moments. And here's another uncomfortable truth. Most of us have no practice at being. We're doers, high performers, output machines. And when the output stops, we don't know what to do with ourselves. Ted's teacher gave him an exercise that sounds simple and is actually brutal.
There's my teacher, John Wineland, has been a longtime teacher of mine. He would say, go do nothing meticulously. Meaning, I'm just going to sit here on the couch for 10 minutes today. And I'm not going to practice my breath patterns. I'm not going to meditate. I'm not going to journal. That is so hard for some people. And so revealing.
Do nothing meticulously. Not meditate, not journal, not breathe in a holotropic pattern, not listen to a podcast. Just sit like a human animal on a porch. Channel your inner cat. I tried this last week. I lasted about 3 minutes before I grabbed my phone. I didn't need to check anything, but the silence was too loud because my brain often doesn't know what to do when it's not being fed content or producing output. That's the work. That's the work. Learning to be present without an agenda. Learning that you have value even when you're not producing anything. Here's something else Ted said that stayed with me.
The biggest change for me, one big change was recognizing, hey, I needed to change. I need to exercise these practices. Even the bigger change was I couldn't do it alone. And that took me another 10 years to figure that one out. But that was we can't be in isolation.
10 years to figure out that he couldn't do it alone. And this tracks with everything that we've talked about on this show. We talked about the physics of friendship, the engineering of social containers. We've talked a little bit about relationships. Here we go again, coming back to the same truth. Connection isn't a soft skill. It's not a nice to have. It's the foundation. Ted talked about his experience in men's group, spaces where the mask isn't just discouraged, it's actively called out.
Some of those most powerful spaces I've been in were men's groups that prior to this I thought I'd never needed, but men's groups where I could show you my heart. I could sit with you. I could reveal things that I maybe didn't like revealing to myself, let alone to other people. And you didn't need anything from me. So you didn't need me to do anything. You were just there to hold it.
That's the opposite of the professional mask. There to just hold it. In our careers, everyone needed something from us. Every interaction is transactional. Even our friendships often have an undercurrent of networking, of strategic value. But in the containers Ted's describing, you bring your mess, your shame, your unprocessed grief, and the other people, they just hold it. They don't fix it. They don't judge it. They don't need you to be anything other than what you are in that moment. I've experienced this in my own men's group, and I'll be honest, it felt awkward and forced. At first, I kept waiting for the agenda. I kept bracing from someone to need something from me. But the container holds. And eventually you start showing parts of yourself that haven't seen light in a really long time.
Yeah. It's going to feel awkward at first.
Get used to the discomfort.
Get used to the discomfort. Exactly. Get used to the discomfort. It might feel forced here and there, but it's one of those things that if you stick with it, commit to it, there's a breakthrough.
I asked Ted for one question someone standing at the threshold of their third should sit with. His answer was simple and deep.
I would say this about any stage in life, any year in life, really. If you couldn't get it wrong, what would life look like? What would you do? Who would you be with? Where would you go? And there are factors obviously that come in, like we've got aging parents, or we've got taking care of kids. Like those things, create some boundaries. But generally, people are afraid to do the V part of that formula. They're afraid to vision. They don't have permission. And I'm saying, give yourself permission. What could life?
If you knew you could not fail.
If you knew you could not fail, what would be next?
Ask yourself this question. If you knew you could not fail, what would be next? This is the vision piece, the V in the formula. And for a lot of us, it's a 0. Not because we don't have desires, but because we don't give ourselves permission to really want them. We spend so long being practical, managing risk, meeting expectations, that the very idea of visioning without constraints kind of feels irresponsible. Childish, dangerous. But Ted asked himself these questions 15 years ago, and he answered it. He built a life that includes meaningful work, an always growing relationship with his wife, Leslie, 2 kids. Not because he was brave, but because he was done with the old life, ready to build something real.
And some people say, oh, you were so brave, right? You took this big step. You moved from full-time rabbi work to coaching and teaching around intimacy and relationships. And that was so brave of you. And usually I just smile and nod. But sometimes I'm very candid. Like, it wasn't brave. Like, I don't think I had a choice. I was done. I knew that identity was over.
All right, this has been a meaty episode, my first interview. Thanks, Ted, for allowing me to bring you into the space here. Let's bring this home with your homework, dear listener. I'm calling this the Authentic Pivot Protocol. 3 assignments for this week. Assignment 1, identify your mask. Somewhere in your life, there's a space where your emotional barometer is set to safe rather than true, where you're performing a version of yourself that meets other people's expectation. I want you to name it. Write it down. What's the mask? Where do you wear it? And what would happen if you took it off? Assignment 2, solve the formula. Pick something you're stuck on. Could be a relationship, a career question, a health habit, whatever's been nagging at you. Rate yourself 1 to 10 on dissatisfaction, vision, and first steps. Where's the 0? Where's the weak link in the formula? That's your starting point. If your vision is weak, sit with Ted's question. If you knew you could not fail, what would be next? And write the answer, even if it feels ridiculous. Assignment 3, engineer your container. Find one space this week where performance is not required. Could be in a men's group or a women's group. Could be in a therapist's office. A coffee with an old friend where you actually have large talk, not small talk. Show one real part of yourself to one safe person. See what it feels like to be seen. Ted reminded me of something that I managed to keep forgetting. Your portrait isn't painted. Your paint isn't dry. We're not done evolving, no matter what that voice in our head keeps telling us. I had a conversation last year with my dad's best friend, Tom. I mentioned that we'd love to see him out in California, to get on a plane, to come visit. And Tom said, "No, I think I'm done doing that." I said, "Why, Tom? You're aging. There's going to be a point where you don't do that anymore." And Tom said, "I'm not aging. I'm aged." I want to tell him, your paint isn't dry. But picking up the brush again requires something uncomfortable. It requires admitting that the version of us the world sees isn't the whole picture. It requires stepping into the abyss between who we were and who we might become. It requires doing nothing meticulously and letting the silence reveal what's been hiding underneath. I'm still working on this, still catching myself reaching for the mask out of habit, still learning to trust that the real me is worth showing. But I'm learning, and that's the whole point. And I'm learning a lot from all of you. A number of you have reached out to me. My email is steve@yourthirdthird.com. Have commented on my Substack posts, which you can find on Substack. Look for Your Third Third if you like reading. I get so much joy from hearing back from you. I look forward to speaking to you again next episode. Until then, identify the mask, solve the formula, create the container. I'm Steve Gershik, and this is Our Third Third.